According to the cloud. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 6. Yes, it's week 6. The good news is that we've done all we could do in terms of discussing capitalism and criticizing capitalism and highlighting the contradictions of the system. Not only that, which was, of course, part of the agenda for the first half of the semester, but also another objective was to develop some critical thinking skills that we can extend and apply to the rest of the semester, which is about the investigation of potential and maybe even actually existing alternatives to capitalism. I think we have learned a lot of interesting points, and one point that I would like to highlight is that there is no pure absolute form of capitalism. Capitalism has always been kind of diluted with non-capitalistic values as the result of people's struggles and pressures and the contradictions of the systems, and even some people within the system that they have been more rational than the others, trying to prioritize some long-term interests of the system. The same can be said about the alternatives. For instance, it's very difficult to find an alternative that has been fully realized in the past or can be. Even the Soviet Union, that was kind of the it was understood as the opposites, opposition to capitalism. The mirror image was actually had some interesting elements of the superiority of capital. Some people would say that capital was concentrated in the hands of the government of the state, the one party ruling the state. So that concentration of the power and the fact that the workers didn't have any authority, any democracy, I would say self-determination in terms of deciding what to produce, how to produce, and what to do with the outcome. In many ways, that system kind of replicated, but in a kind of a mirror image way. So yeah, that's something to perhaps reflect on outside the framework of the course, because this course is not about communism. But that was one of the lessons. So the critical thinking skills, the fact that we became more sensitive towards the issues of justice, ecological sustainability, if you like, and democracy. And we realized that the system has failed us in terms of delivering such things. And things unfortunately have become worse and worse the more the system has become globalized. Therefore, that sensitivity is something that we would like to take with us and apply it to any potential solution from within the framework of capitalism, or any potential solution or alternative from outside, because we don't want to not only replicate the problems we had in the past in our struggles and efforts to go beyond capitalism in the 20th century, but also we don't want to reproduce those problems, as one of the readings says very clearly, Chris Rogers, the first one, replicate those problems like gender discrimination, class discrimination, racial discrimination, in the process of producing alternatives or solutions. So that is, I think, one of the perhaps most important takeaways. Yeah, if we go to the modules, we're in week 6. And yeah, you can see that I have shared the lecture notes plus 3 samples of the assignment done last year, and I have removed the names and added. I'll go through them very quickly later. But also, yes, these are the readings that we are going to deal with. I'm afraid they're a little bit too lengthy, maybe for many of us, but they are very critical. They are just in week 6, where we are going to change the discourse, and they are very critical in the sense that both of them not only introduce us to a range of alternatives, but also both of them take a, I would say, critical perspective. They do not deal with this alternative in a passive way. So the first one, let's call it the first one, written by Chris Rogers, and it's part of, as a chapter from a book. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have time, and I don't think it's necessary to read the entire book, but I chose this chapter because it's about alternatives to capitalism, and he covers 3. He doesn't call them classical, but let's call them classical alternatives from 19th, 20th century. That people have experimented on, and he goes through them. It's a very long chapter, unfortunately, but remember, one of the other skills we try to develop in this course is to be highly pragmatist in reading. We live in the age of information, and we're bombarded with lots of information, so you have to be a little bit more clever, and try to only focus on the main points, always the main points. And normally the main points are the ones that make sense. And they were normally written in kind of general and plain language. So if you go through, for instance, this. Okay, so this is the first one, and then the second one, which is an article from a journal written by Wendy Harcourt, and she's an academic and I believe feminist, maybe eco-feminist, and she goes through a number of alternatives that are not addressed in the first one. These are mostly the newer alternatives, so alternatives that emerged in more recent decades, although they have very kind of strong historical roots in the past. And they too are very much interrelated with movements that push for these agendas and push for these alternatives. So there is the first one covers 3 sets of, I would say, old or classical alternatives. And one good reason to discuss them is that because of the problems with the system now, more and more people are thinking of bringing those alternatives back, and at the same time being critical of them and trying to reinvent them in 21st century and see what happens. So critical reflection on those alternatives is very much critical. It's very much central and or I would say crucial. And then the second one also covers another 3 sets or types of alternatives. Okay, again, we're not expecting that every sentence would make sense to everyone. Okay, I've been reading these articles and these readings every year, and I'm learning more and more. So I'm not expecting that every sentence would make sense. As I said, we would like just to be very selective and get the gist of each argument in each one of them. Okay, anyone remembers what types of what are the 3 types of alternative that Rogers discussed?
So he discusses libertarianism. I think he called it utopian socialism, which is like cooperatives,
yes,
with workplaces, and socialism.
Well done, very good. So yes, so here's part 3, libertarianism, and I've got a bit of a problem with that because it doesn't fit very well with the title of the chapter. The title of the chapter is what? Alternatives to capitalism. But he recognizes what? Yeah.
Libertarianism just in that system?
No, but it has some similarities. Okay. Okay, so why you think libertarianism doesn't fit the title very well? Yes.
It's about reducing the role of the state to increase the root of the market. So
Yeah. So practically, it's an alternative capitalism, right? And he says that actually he says that it's an alternative. It's not an alternative capitalism. Although libertarians are critical of the status quo, I will play later something from the YouTube. That is a discussion with the 3 guys, and one of them represents libertarianism. And if you may remember, we said that neoliberalism is capitalism on a steroid, right? I think again, libertarianism is neoliberalism on a steroid. That these guys are not satisfied with neoliberalism. They want to completely minimize the role of government in any regulation. Interestingly, for instance, the GFC happened, and you will see that guy will say that. And Obama wanted to say when bail out the big banks, they said no, just let them, go down. And no politician would really dare to do that, because as Obama said, they're too big to fail. They're going to put out eggs in their baskets, and if they fail, everything would fail. And then no one said, well, if they're too big to fail, why they're not too big to be the publicists? No, why they should be in just in private hands if they're too big, right? Okay.
Like they're too big to fail at the same time. They go against the state when they're interfering and regulating. That when it shows like some of the contradictions in there. Libertarianism and consistently they're going to take from there.
Yeah, I mean, if you let them go down, then the system becomes so chaotic, too chaotic, and the whole entire capital system will face serious problems. So what they do, they bail them out, but at the same time they nationalize them, so the government will own them. But then when the government owns them, this government saves them, and then when they are functional again, they become privatized again. So it's a yes. We'll get to that discussion, but let's quickly go through some of this, but thank you. I understand you would like to push for a deeper conversation, but we'll get there. Yeah, okay, thank you. So yes, so the first section is about libertarianism. And he acknowledges that the claims of libertarianism about social justice and efficiency, they don't square with the rest of the principles. Now, in the discussion of libertarianism, remember he gets a little bit too philosophical. And we don't want to waste our time with that. Okay, you don't need to. You can just skim through. That makes sense, but then you don't. You will be like me. So just remember this. One of the good things that he does is that he's very good at summarizing things and outlining the objectives. So if you want just to warm up and make yourself a little bit familiar with the chapter, you can just read the introduction and then maybe conclusion and the beginning of each section for each one of those three alternatives, or maybe the end of each section. So you'll see that he summarizes, he outlines the objectives of his discussion, and his in that sense, he makes life a little bit easier for us. So then he starts with libertarianism, and as you said, then he moves on. It's a very lengthy discussion of libertarianism. If you just get the main ideas, that's enough. For the commentary, all you need to say is that, okay, here is the first alternative that Rogers covers, a very short description of that alternative, and you say, well, this is not really alternative, as he says, and here are the problems from his point of view, from the author's point of view, the problems and strengths of the alternative. And then you just quickly move on to the second and then the third, and you're done with Rogers. And then you go for the second half of your commentary will be, the body of the commentary will be about the second reading, the same structure, right? Okay, and then he moves on to discuss another very interesting, which appeared to be an alternative to capitalism. And that he calls the cooperative economies or cooperative alternatives to capitalism. And he discusses some, again, classical examples from 19th century. Robert Owen, who was a capitalist, and he decided to share his wealth and establish those communities where the community members and the workers own the means of production, but then things, well, they achieved a lot of good things. Even Marx and Engels appreciated them very much, but then they showed their weaknesses, which turned very ugly, and then they couldn't sustain. They wanted to create kind of comfort zones within capitalism, not to challenge the system, just let's create a niche somewhere and grow from there. You may remember I mentioned a quote from a guy, the architect, who was saying that if you just create an alternative that looks better than the current system will go obsolete and everyone will come and love your alternative. So that's that mentality, that instead of wasting our resources and time and energy trying to fix the system or trying to challenge the system that is so resistant to change, why not find a place or a space and create something new and show it to the world that we can do it, and then it may appeal to the rest of the population, and then they may comment on and adopt it. And this way we avoid fighting in, which normally goes very ugly and bloody. But then this mentality is still with many activists. When I surveyed them, a lot of them said that they don't really care much about the politics. And they may choose, one of the parties or a few parties that are closer to their values, but they're not going to invest a lot of hope or get very much active in the politics. or party politics or the formal parliamentary politics. But again, you see on the other side, there are also groups that are very much engaged in politics and they don't have time for creating alternative spaces. So these are the people who try to actually create their own little words and based on principles and values that are non-capitalistic and save themselves, like Noah's Ark. So they want to have their own arks and avoid the crisis and save themselves. But and then towards the end of the section, he outlines their problems, and he also mentions some of the modern versions of that cooperatives. I mean, this mentality is not limited to cooperatives, and a lot of anarchists also would share, especially the ones who want to have autonomous communities. But it can be extended. You see the parallels between cooperative economies with community economies and the like. But then also he mentions something I believe about the new ones. For instance, Mondragon is a giant cooperative. The fact that cooperatives, I mean, they don't make really headlines, but they employ more than corporations all across the world. Many people are very much involved. They come in many different forms, of course. Mondragon, for instance, is an interesting case. It's a giant one. It started in 1950s in Basque in Spain, and they now have grown very, very well. They have their own university. They have their own banking system. It's a chain of cooperatives that they buy from each other and sell to each other. So they back up each other. Again, one of the criticisms or one of the limitations of such even such a successful case is that while they are very democratic and cooperative from within, they behave like the capitalist corporations from outside, because they have to actually try to save themselves and grow in a kind of a capitalistic environment. They have to survive. And this has become even worse since the European Union adopted more and more of the neoliberal policies and agendas. So that's something again to consider. And then the third and the last section is about socialist alternatives, and it discusses Marx and Engels, and then the socialist states of the 20th century and things that went wrong. Also the socialists in Western Europe and North America. And towards the end, what he says that if you reflect, I mean, it's the conclusion is very interesting. He discusses a number of very, very important points towards the end. For instance, here the last sentence before the conclusion about the socialism, in this sense, he says, in this sense, like the other alternatives to capitalism that this chapter has discussed, well, there was only one actually, that was the cooperative. The libertarian wasn't alternative to capitalism, but anyway, this chapter has discussed socialism should be perceived as a process that must be continually made and remade in the image of the interest of people that constitute it, rather than as an end point or outcome to follow capitalism. That's been one of the problems with many people who get involved in alternatives. They normally think that alternatives are an end point and forget that it's a process of learning and revisiting and revising and rebuilding, remaking, and things get very fixed, and the alternatives turns out to be a closed system, I would say, rather than an open system. It becomes practically like capitalism, which is a closed loop produced to get more profit and not a profit motive, and then invest the profit back into the production. So it's a closed circle, and this disregard the limitations of the environment and the capacities of the humans and so on and so forth. Just keep that treadmill of capitalism, as Hans Beer was talking about. It is important to consider that alternatives are not products; they are processes. When people truly participate in making and remaking them, then they will flourish, and then they have a better chance of becoming or achieving their goals. Then towards the end again, he in the conclusion he makes a few other interesting points that, for instance, maybe we should embrace diversity. We should make sure that the problems we have in capitalism are not reproduced, and so on and so forth. For instance, he talks a lot about the issue of gender and how gender discrimination could have been reproduced through alternatives that have been trying to address class discrimination or class division, and so on and so forth. In many old socialists or Marxists were saying that, well, the gender discrimination is the byproduct of class division. And if we just get rid of capitalism and we create a classless society, automatically the trickle-down. You see that parallel between this kind of mentality and the trickle-down capitalism. That's why I say they replicate capitalism sometimes. So that gender equality will trickle down. So let's put it in on the back seats, and later we will achieve something. If you look at the liberal feminists, they say the same thing in relation to class. I mean, normally they don't recognize class, but even if they do, they say it's let's first deal with the gender discriminations and achieve gender inequality, and then class would be class divisions would be narrowed. I mean, and they're mostly it's an elite feminism. It's they're very cheerful. For instance, the board of a company has equal numbers of men and women. I mean, you can put 6 Gina Reinhardts next to 6 Trumps or 5 Connors and celebrate gender equality, but it's not going to have anything to do with the working class women. This intersectionality between gender and race, Rosa Luxemburg, a Marxist feminist of early 19th century German, I think something interesting is attributed to her. I'm not sure if she has said that, but she says something like this. Of course, I heard it. The woman of the working class is a slave of another state, and the woman of bourgeois class, upper class, is a parasite of another parasite. See this interaction, intersectionality between gender and race is captured by this sentence. So Rogers also advocates for diversity, and maybe we shouldn't think that there's just one giant narrative that is going to be the blueprint of our of solutions or to all of our global problems, something like that. And that's it finishes there by raising these interesting points. And then you'll see that it seems that that job of advocating for or highlighting diversity is taken by Wendy Harcourt. So you see these two pieces of writing complement each other very well. So not only the first one covers the old ones and the second one covers the newer ones, but also the second one, you'll see that she covers a more diverse range. Especially she covers the alternatives that are very self-aware of the problems that Rogers pick up on, but when he critically reflects on the classical alternatives. Yeah, so anyone remembers the three types of alternatives she covers? I don't know how many of you have started reading, but someone else. No one has read maybe even the abstract. If you just look at the abstract, you okay. Go ahead.
Starting with alternatives that she addresses are like Green New Deal alternatives.
Yeah.
The second step are eco-feminist alternatives, and the third step is like queer engineer.
Yes, yes.
As a Latin American way of thinking.
Yes.
Sort of want to decolonize view, like alternative to capitalism.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Very well. Thank you. Okay. So you will see that, yeah, there are three alternatives. Yeah, we have two people on Zoom. If you can hear me, yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself and jump in and make any comments or answer our questions, please. Yeah, so we have three alternatives, and then, as you said, the first set is the Green New Deal. Again, Green New Deal and the like are reformists, you may remember from our past conversations, and they're not alternatives to capitalism. So that sounds, resembles the first option Rogers discusses. But they are more related to the issue of, they're more progressive, of course, they're not like libertarians. Now, libertarianism is like, if you're a drug addict and you are sick, the reason that you are sick is you're not taking enough drugs. So take more drugs and you will be fine. It's the logic is like that, reconstructing in this way, so it will sit with your mind. Then, but the Green New Deal is kind of reformist. It's progressive reformist. Okay, before I go ahead, something I forgot to mention about Rogers is that again, as we would like also be mindful of the limitations of the writings of the authors, and well, one limitation I could perhaps pick up is the fact that first thing first, he tries to cover alternatives to capitalism, but the first one is not an alternative, and he acknowledges that. That's fine. But if he includes libertarianism, okay, which is not an alternative to capitalism, why he doesn't include social democracy, which was a progressive one? And yes, that was an alternative to capitalism, but if you have libertarianism, why not then social democracy? So, and also, as you said, anarchism is not really covered well in this, because that was also very much. So cooperativism resembles anarchism, but not completely. There are big differences as well. So that's one thing. And also, yeah, he takes us to where that diversity is good, but not beyond that. Well, maybe we haven't read the rest of the book, but I doubt that he covers all the type of alternatives that Wendy covers. Now, as we said, Wendy covers more newer movements and alternatives. One interesting difference between the two is that Rogers directly reflects on the alternatives and very critically, highlighting their strengths and weaknesses. But Wendy doesn't do that in relation to her alternatives. She looks at them through the lens of the literature. When you read the article, you feel that she's practically doing kind of a literature review, and she presents those alternatives in in a way that they are presented by those authors that she mentions their names in the headings of each section, which is fine, but she is not like Rogers directly reflecting on the. She mentions sometimes she reflects, but not she doesn't dedicate most of the arguments. Presenting her own views on each one of them. It's very much more embedded and less direct, I would say. But she also makes her points towards the end as well. Points like that, for instance, if I remember correctly, for instance, the Green New Dealers or reformists should also listen to the non-reformists, and the connections are important, the interactions are important, and so on and so forth. And another thing that she mentions towards the end, again, it was an interesting point, which actually incentivized me and a colleague from Helsinki to write an article in response to what she says. And it's been quite a few decades that under a number of titles like pluriversality and things like that. Yeah, that's the thing that she says. Let's see if I can make it larger. We've been celebrating diversity without getting anywhere meaningful, without creating any meaningful challenge or change in the system. Yes, one of the problems with capitalism is that it homogenizes and undermines diversity, and it wants to bring everyone under the umbrella of one lifestyle, one set of principles. We are all free bastards and so on and so forth. We all look at their self-interest. And if everyone looks after their self-interest, which corresponds to human nature, therefore the greater good comes. An alternative system to such a homogenizing system is a system that celebrates and promotes diversity, right? So it can't be alien to diversity. People, different cultures, different settings, different contexts, different sets of needs and values. They all need to be, people need to be free to choose how they want to live, as far as that's not going to undermine others' autonomies and so on and so forth. But this diversity, again, you see that problem that cooperatives have, we'll establish our own way of being, and then finally the system will be gradually, peacefully, possibly be replaced. That hasn't happened, and the window of time is getting, narrower and narrower. The time frame that we have to save the planet. We are dealing with global crises that are serious, and they require forces that challenge the system at the core of it. And maybe yes, finally out of this interaction between this lovely, interesting, diverse responses, something interesting may appear, but do we have time for that? But on the other hand, you see the dilemma. On the other hand, should we push ourselves into adopting another authoritarian alternative because of the urgency of the situation, because of the crisis? So you see, this is what I would say that the most crucial dilemma that the progressives, the so-called left, if you like, is facing. On the one hand, they don't want to repeat the the experience of the, the Soviet-like experience of the 20th century and end up having a kind of leftist authoritarianism. And they want to embrace diversity as much as possible. But on the other hand, we're finding ourselves in a very difficult situations, and out of this diversity, we don't see a force appearing that would challenge and change the entire system, quickly enough and forcefully enough. So this is the supreme, I call it the supreme dilemma of change. Yes, this mentality is still among, I found it very, very much popular, yes, the diversity is good, but again, you'll see that resembles something we are very familiar. That out of the interaction, free interaction in these free, diverse alternatives, the greater good comes, which reminds us of what? Neoliberalism, right? Yes, free trade. In the marketplace of free alternatives, as a result of their interactions, we will witness a new system emerges. Would emerge. So you see, this is the supreme dilemma, and how can we overcome that? How can we create unity in diversity? And one of the things that this has been something that has really made me very much concerned, and it's been one of the primary goals of research since 2000. And I have tried to detect the potentialities within the movements to overcome that dilemma. Initially, in a book that I published out of my PhD, I called it accommodative consciousness, and I realized that many activists have that as a potential. They can be themselves and at the same time accommodate the other. And then I moved on to discuss issues like concepts like transversality or transversalism, and more recently the communist framework. I think there needs to be some activists. I personally consider myself as an ideological nomad, someone who travels between ideologies. I may personally favor one or a few over the others, but we need a level that I call it meta-ideological, a level above the ideologies, the progressive ideologies, and some kind of meta movement and activism or meta activism. I'll make you familiar, if I find enough time, I'll make you familiar with some of the works that we do here. I think it's researchers and academics should really get out of their ivory towers and roll up their sleeves and get involved. In the past, many activists were academics and many academics were activists, and there are still few. But the system, unfortunately, doesn't allow us. They make us work like horses. So 24/7. A lot of our courses that, for instance, I used to teach a course on social movements, and you remember last week we had a kind of a very sad conversation that what we can do, and we're feeling very disempowered. And after that, I really couldn't sleep well because I have been spending almost 2 decades studying social movements, and I wasn't speechless. And I think we need to have courses. I used to have, but unfortunately lost it to course optimization. We need to study how people get motivated. the history is full of motivations and mobilizations and movements. The working class movements, the women's movements, the civil rights movements, the anti-slavery movements, and so on and so forth. And to think that, you know, what we have achieved is gifted from the top, it's absolutely wrong, absolutely wrong. One of the dilemmas, I'm an immigrant, one of the dilemmas I have with my fellow immigrants who come from, you know, my country here, and they take a picture of there and they compare it with the picture of here, they can't see similarities. But anyway, I tell them, and they say, look how much freedom these guys have. They can make fun of their prime minister and they're not put to jail. We just have something vague about our supreme leader or whatever, and then God knows what happens to us, right? So, well, you know, if you look at this little, you know, freedom that we have has been achieved, it's been achieved as a result of the a lot of social movements, you know, protests people have put their lives on. Fortunately, the West didn't have other countries interfering in their politics, so people here could achieve something. Whereas in the global South, every time we have achieved something, we have seen huge interferences from the West into our politics to prevent us to achieve them. I talked about the coup against the prime minister who nationalized the oil, and it's full of, you know, the history is, especially 20th century, is full of interventions. You know, the Chilean coup d'etat, a lot of coup d'etats that happen in the global South, either in the hard form or the soft forms, they were as a result of a lot of interferences and interventions. Because if imagine those who own the resources also have democracy. If they have real democracy, and if they decide to keep the oil under the ground, then that would be a bad idea. They should be removed. Democracy works as far as it works for the interests of the superpowers and the powerful. That kind of democracy is good and should be certainly exported. But if that democracy results in resistance, results in independence, well, that may not be a very good idea. So yeah, you see that this is the dilemma, and again, while we can celebrate and we should celebrate the pluriverse, not the universe of alternatives, but the issue is that how we can make them work better together, how we can create synergies and you know, coalitions and collaboration across these movements. I think there are interesting ideas in this relation, but the reality evolves the way it evolves. We may not get there. Since 2019, whatever I have been publishing, I've been trying together with my team network. We've been trying to warn that these 2 decades are going to be 2020s, 2030s, of course, maybe 2040s, are going to be the most critical decades in the most critical century in human history. And we will see, you know, the protests are coming up, and we will see that people are not going just to sit. I mean, in the past they haven't been doing that, but we will see that more and people in different contexts for different reasons. The central theme of these movements will be life. So I would call them personally, that's a kind of a proposition, of course, hypothetical, but I would call them the life revolts or the revolutions for life, because it's the life that is under threat. Yes.
Just a comment about your country, Iran. It's a very interesting history, isn't it? That the Shah was in control and he was deposed. And I believe that's because people thought he was a puppet of the Americans. But then the Ayatollah came in, and now the country is run by the mullahs, correct? Yeah, and they have Sharia law. So how is the country of Iran run? So it's not a monarchy, it's not a democracy. Just as out of interest, how is it run?
Yeah, you might say bureaucracy, but it's not the subject of today. We can just briefly discuss that. I think after Turkey and Israel, it has the most frequent number of elections. So they have tried to bring kind of a theocracy with republicanism, and that has given some dynamism to the system. But towards the more recent years, we've seen that as the system has become closer and closer in its own politics.
Yeah.
But
So
again,
that's one alternative.
yes.
Yeah.
The problem is, again, it's a very complex situation. It's really, really complex situation. But remember, one of the policies of the West in the Middle East, and coming from the Cold War era, was to give upper hand to the religious fundamentalists to fight back communism.
Right.
Okay, in Afghanistan, what they did, a lot of these, religious fundamentalists are the byproduct of their policy. And American politicians, like Hillary Clinton, we have acknowledged that as a mistake. So this way of running a situation that we put some people and empower them to fight against each other, and then those people become our own enemies, and then they fight back, and this sort of thing. So these are very complex situations.
But it's not a capitalist society.
Oh yes, it's capitalist to the truth. 90-something% of the workers in Iran, despite all the anti-American slogans and so on and so forth, are on casual short-term contracts. You look at how workers are treated. You look at how the capital is concentrated in a system. You'll see that So you just look further down. That surface tension. Look down and see how things.
Alternative, but it's not.
Oh no way. No.
I think it gets the Shah and all that side of the workers and left, left, all that.
Yeah, there's no left left. Yeah, and it's not just Iran. It's all over the Middle East and many other places. Unfortunately, liberal democracy is in decline in many places. But it can also be the beginning of more radical and deeper versions of democracy. The demand for more realistic democracy. Anyway, so we've got these two readings, and they cover a number of interesting alternatives. Again, be very pragmatist. So the green. So she starts with Green New Deal and the reformist. Then she goes on to discuss ecofeminists, a number of them through the lens of a few authors, and then the Buen Vivir. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that. I don't know Spanish. It means living well together, which is an indigenous movement, and it's actually in a few countries influenced policy. Evo Morales. I have shared, if you go to module number, week 6 module, you'll see that I have shared a number of very interesting short and interesting videos. This one, for instance, about Evo Morales, and he was from this Buen Vivir thing. Well, the video doesn't say that, but anyway, they pushed for eco-socialism and how it worked and didn't work. So they achieved a lot of interesting things. But you see that colonialism, the remnants of colonialism, the influence of colonialism is still with us. The infrastructure of the country is set to serve the interests of the global north. So in order to push for reform and achieve higher levels of social security and inequality, they have to keep extracting their minerals and oil and gas and so on and so forth. And then they became dependent on the fluctuations of the commodities in the market, and this affected their ability. So that the continuation of dependence on extractivism, capitalist extractivism, became an obstacle against the reforms. So despite the fact they achieved very interesting, and you just watch that, very interesting achievements, but unfortunately, it didn't finally result in system change. And also issues like degrowth and the like. So just to make yourself familiar with these stories, again, remember, our primary goal is mostly to make ourselves familiar with these different attempts and efforts and things that may sound promising, but also their limitations as well. And where those limitations come, is that from within them, or is that because of the changes, because of the structures that resist to change? Anyway, okay. Let's watch something and make things a little bit less dry and boring.
Dominating political parties in this country.
Yeah, okay, I hope that people
The problem.
okay, yeah, this is a conversation between three guys. This is Abby Martin. She is a journalist. She used to work for RT until it was banned by YouTube. Yeah, we've got three guys. One of them represents libertarianism. One represents socialism, and the other one represents anarchism. We can, as I said, we can see some similarities between anarchism and cooperative economies in Rogers. So I thought that could be a YouTube version of Rogers' chapter, right? So maybe I think it's about 12 minutes. We watch that together, and you if you like, you can quickly take. I mean, these guys speak very fast. Take some notes and see if we can what we think of them, and if we can relate this conversation to the readings. If you haven't read the readings, that's fine. Maybe that helps you a little bit with the reading, make it a little bit more understandable.
That these two teams, Democrats and Republicans, more closely resemble a single party, one that stands for imperialism and corporate gain. Yet several political ideologies are gaining traction in the U.S., but have virtually no representation within the political and media establishment. So if you've tuned into the show hoping to hear the dueling perspective of Democrats and Republicans, well, you've come to the wrong place. Because today, I'll be hosting a discussion with people who represent the voices of a growing alternative. We'll be talking about libertarianism, anarchism, and socialism, three philosophies gaining momentum as more and more people are becoming disillusioned with the status quo. So to talk about everything from the role of government to an ideal society, I'm joined now by a brilliant panel and breaking the set's first ever Alternative Voices debate, starting with Scott Crow, author of Black Flags and Windmills and founder of the anarchist Common Ground Collective. Austin Peterson, production director at Freedom Works and editor of LibertarianRepublic.com, and Eugene Puryear, former vice presidential candidate of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Thanks so much, all of you, for coming on.
Thanks so much for having us.
Before we start this epic debate, or conversation rather, I wanted you to briefly outline your political ideologies in about a minute's time. Scott, When people think of anarchism, they think total chaos. Can you break down that misconception for us?
It's a misconception. Anarchy is a living and dynamic framework based in ideas of cooperation, where we can all get along to make the world better for each other. We call it mutual aid. The ideas of direct action, that we don't have to wait on others, that we are more than voters, we are more than consumers, there are other paths that we should take, and we don't need to wait on others to do it. We start to do it ourselves, and we do it in our communities. The ideas there's a myriad of collective liberation, that we're all tied in this together, that I don't want to do better on the back of somebody else, and I don't want somebody to do better on the back of me, that again, we're in this together. And these ideas have a long, over 100-year tradition of libertarianism, but it's social libertarianism, where it's the better for all of us. And it's also anti-capitalist. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make, because capitalism has been exploitative, capitalism has been oppressive to communities all over the planet, and to an extraction of resources, and destroyed the earth along the way.
Thank you. In Austin, libertarianism is gaining traction, yet it's been so convoluted by the establishment. Right. Describe true libertarianism to our audience.
True libertarianism would be called classical liberalism, meaning you get all of your liberties. You get your social liberties and you get your economic liberties. And I would disagree that capitalism is exploitative. I think that capitalism is what allows us to accrue the materials that we need to help more people. So if I go out and I make a lot of money like Bill Gates, then I have money to do things like invest in cancer research or in malaria research, and to do more good things for the community. So to me, it's really about the idea that you should be allowed to have as much liberty as possible without harming someone else. But, you know, really, H.L. Mencken had this funny quote. He says, you know, I believe in one thing, liberty, but I don't believe in it enough to force it on anyone else. So if you don't believe that you have the right to force your beliefs on anyone else, you might be a libertarian.
And Eugene, you represent the big, scary beast that so many people run the opposite direction. One of probably the most misunderstood philosophies currently in this country. Explain socialism for the audience.
Of course. Well, in a nutshell, socialism is essentially the mirror opposite of capitalism. It's using the massive wealth and great things that we know our society can be created by, and, you know, not waiting on a Bill Gates, for example, to solve cancer, but mobilizing the governmental power, the democratic power of people concentrated in a governmental state power to defeat cancer if we know we need to defeat cancer, to build affordable housing if we know we need to build affordable housing, and all these things that as a society we know we have consensus on in terms of, you know, a humane standard of living. So socialism ultimately is a means of actualizing a humane standard of living, but recognizing that both counter-revolutionary pressures, the long history of class society, does require sort of an organizational structure that can mitigate sort of the different and varying realities of humanity to move towards that future that ultimately will be a classless society, which is communism.
And let's take a look at some domestic issues going on right now. Right now, 46.2 million people are living below the poverty line in this country. On top of that, of 25 cities surveyed, 21 have seen an increase in homelessness. And finally, despite Obama's job numbers report, only about 60% of American adults are working, which means 40% aren't. Austin, what would you do right now to help the homeless, the food insecure, and the unemployed?
It's a great question. So the first thing is you have to look at how these statistics are measured. So if 46% of people in the United States are below the poverty line, what is the poverty line in the United States? So take a look at us in global terms. The people who are on the poverty line in the United States have cell phones, they have 2 cars, they have microwaves, they have refrigerators. So the free market system that America provides allows even the poor people in the United States, which I don't think there's anyone who believes that you could ever eradicate all poverty, but that you want to raise the standards of living across the board. Capitalism means that as the rich get richer, the poor get richer too, and more people have more opportunities for more jobs. So I think that if we were going to do things to help the poor, we would do things like we would create, we would deregulate a lot of our system, and we would put into place more institutional regulations, such as free market regulations or tort reform, to do things like give incentives to people to actually help. Right now what happens is when we create big government policies to help out poor people, you have lots of unintended consequences. And what happens is that people who are in their communities are not incentivized to help one another. So we create this big government, and everyone assumes that the big government is going to help the poor people. But when you deregulate and you stop taxing people to go and do charity, you incentivize people to go and give charity. What incentive do we have to go out and give charity right now when we have 40% of what we own taxed and given away? So there's no incentive right now. But what I want is for communities to be brought together by the fact that they need each other. I think people need to need each other, and when we create a big government, we say, oh, well, the big nanny state will take care of things, and I want to create a state of people who are more self-reliant.
And Scott, I'm sure you'd take a different approach.
Sure, I agree with the self-reliance, but I don't, not individual self-reliance. I think we need to take government out of the picture, but I also say we need to take multinational corporations out of the picture also, because there is no real free market in this country. You have basically private profits, but subsidized risk, and we don't talk about that when we talk about free markets. But what I want to do is take the long term. It took hundreds of years for us to build up to the power dynamics that we have today, and what I want to do is unwind all of those. That we don't rely on governments and we don't rely on corporations to do all these things, and that we start to build and exercise power from below, and that is localized economies built on solidarity and mutual aid, where people, instead of relying on governments for handouts, that they start to work on food security themselves, create community gardens, create victory gardens, create community-supported agriculture, these small-scale things, creating our own healthcare. If there's a nationalized healthcare, fine, but we need localized healthcare because there's people who still fall through that net for real. All of these things, we start to rebuild the infrastructure in civil society outside of multinational corporations and governments.
And Eugene?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if we want to help the poor in America, we have to break the power of the capitalist class. I mean, corporations in the United States have over $1 trillion that they refuse to invest. A small, tiny elite of people, this is the essence of capitalism. And this is what we've seen over the past 30 years or so, that inequality has actually increased. So the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten poorer. And it is relative, because wealth is relative. You can't measure wealth based on, some abstract principle from somewhere else, but on the abundance of your own society. And I think what we see here is the vast majority of wealth accrues to a small amount of people, and I think ultimately we have to eliminate the capitalist class and allow the broad masses of people to, yes, rely on themselves and through democratic self-practice work together to decide what the priorities are and use the massive productive abilities of our country to meet those.
And let's move on to Wall Street. Right now, of course, we have too big to fail banks, CEOs of Wall Street immune to prosecution, apparently. And take a look at this article. Corporate profits have risen almost 20 times faster than workers' income since 2008, yet they're not hiring and virtually paying zero in taxes. Austin, how would you regulate Wall Street?
Oh, good question. I would let the market regulate Wall Street. See, what has happened is after the New Deal, corporations got in bed with the government and they said, well, we need to work together so that we can stimulate our economy. And they said, well, let's build infrastructure projects, for example. And what big government is doing is it's taking all of our wealth and it's redirecting them to what they think is a good use. So I think what we have to do is we have to set corporations into the marketplace and force them to compete. Right now, for example, Obamacare is a perfect example. It guarantees profits to corporations. So it's basically a bailout. Obamacare basically says that these institutions, these insurance companies, they are never going to go bankrupt because we are going to get a guaranteed salary from the state. Look at our farmers. Our farmers are heavily subsidized, and what happens? You get what you're talking about, the stratification of wealth, and it goes to the top. But you have to understand is that corporations, when they're in a free market, they're in a much more chaotic atmosphere, and they can be eaten up by smaller competitors much easier when they aren't hyper-regulated. The corporations write the regulations, and then the Congress goes in and passes them so that they benefit the big corporations because they don't like competition. Big corporations don't like capitalism. It's the small businessmen that have to compete in an economy that are harmed by regulations. So if you're going to talk about regulations, I would set them afloat out in the ocean and make them fight for their own profits, because what would happen is that the smaller businesses would come in and they would eat their lunch.
And Eugene, how do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think the reality is we live in a society where it is correct that monopoly capitalism dominates the whole of the economy. But, as it concerns the banks and the Wall Street, there's significant self-regulation already. The Basel capital buffer agreements and other things like that are sort of industry-regulated things. So I think that already exists. And we see, like the California energy example, when deregulation happens en masse, there's a significant amount of gaming the system. The competition, it creates more anarchy, if you will, and creates sort of a situation where volatility is introduced in a major way. I think ultimately with Wall Street, what we have to do is eliminate the profit motive. I mean, it's ultimately the profit motive that drives all corporations in capitalism, and it drives Wall Street to pursue more and more and more reckless ways of making profit, because that's what competition does. Competition certainly forces you to put profit above all, which moves you into more riskier behavior, which moves you into economic crisis, bubbles, volatility, and so on.
I just have one quick question. We have about a minute left, but Austin, how would the market prevent the monopolies from forming if there is no regulation?
Well, you have to take a look at what is a monopoly. So, for example, does anybody have a monopoly on all of the oil supplies all over the world? And what are the products that people absolutely require for their basic living standards? So, if you're saying that Microsoft has a monopoly, you're basically saying that everyone has a right to Microsoft's products in the first place. So, if you were talking about a monopoly, the number one monopoly we have right now is the monopoly on force, which is what the government owns. So, I really do want to break up monopoly. I would like to end the monopoly on our banking system owned by the Federal Reserve. I'd like to end the monopoly on our agriculture system by the Department of Ag. So the real monopolies are the government monopolies, because those are monopolies on force and there are no other choices. But the free market is not a monopoly because you have choices and can take your money and move it somewhere else. Not so with the IRS.
And Scott, do you have anything to add? What would an anarchist society do with the banking system that we see right now?
I don't want a kinder, gentler capitalism. I don't want a kinder, gentler government. I don't want either of them. We don't need either of them. And multinational corporations are an aberration of small business, and they should not even exist. There is always, if there's concentrated wealth, no one can make a decision about that. There's no free economies. There's no free market. That's all pipe dream stuff. And so again, what I'm talking about is localized economies, bringing it back where people can be face-to-face make decisions, where people in bioregions can make decisions about the resources. You know, there are monopolies. ExxonMobil has a monopoly. They own upstream and downstream all the oil that touches anybody in this planet. And whether in a free market or with governments, it's like, I don't want a kinder, gentler ExxonMobil. I don't want ExxonMobil.
And we're going to talk about civil liberties next. Always amazing to hear your guys' perspective. Stay tuned for that. We'll be right back.
Okay.
By regulations.
Stop it here. Somewhere we have 3 of them in the picture. What do you think, guys? We will start on the back of the class. Thank you, Ryan. What do you think of this? What do you think of
it looks like most people they are much friendly ties with advanced knowledge. Very anxious. This is exactly what we see in Sweden, which is haven't gone to that bar on the left and there's no smaller, it's got private and going to and June, and that's his last name. Thank you. He seems to be quite good. I'd like to know more about this.
How about their perspectives? Get to the front.
It's just gonna say that with the caring guy, there's a lot of inconsistencies in the argument for that, you know.
Let me bring the one.
Okay.
So no one from here.
I don't think any of them addressed what can be done constructively to skim off money from the filthy rich. None of them addressed that, and I think that is a big problem. One guy did say that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. I think that is true, but the others didn't seem to think that was right. The guy in the middle, yeah, he thought that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting richer too, but I disagree with that.
The guy in the red shirt, Eugene, that seemed a lot more, because you know how that was kind of the representation of, like, yeah, because he's supposed to have cooperative. Because he's in support of much more something akin to like Soviet style democracy. He gives Assad, because he was talking about removing kind of the revolutionary press, establishing a state which would prevent anything that might undermine socialist policies and so on. So he definitely seemed a lot more hardline than it's just. You know, he was very eloquent. He managed to respond to all of the points. I also found it very funny that you could essentially tell which one was which before they even started talking. Oh, okay.
Okay, okay, I'll come back to you if you have anything to say. You do not.
Yeah, well, the main thing that I found interesting was in the very last segment, Eugene was agreeing that the deregulation would breed more competition, that competition would be chaotic or anarchy, I think he said. I felt that was an interesting concession to make, because my position is that deregulation just breeds stronger monopolies for the scheme matter.
Yeah.
They already possess. So I found that an interesting point to do with that.
I think he was agreeing with
Yeah, okay.
I think he was agreeing with you, he said it does make strong monopoly, but he was saying like it creates anarchy in a bad way. Like
Yes.
just deregulating just allows business to snap up more money left, right, and center.
Yeah, chaos, he meant chaos.
Yeah, I think he meant the ideology now.
No,
Yeah, it should mess things up.
But I didn't think, I thought that he said deregulation means that he was conceding to the guy in the middle. I don't actually have his name. He was conceding to the guy in the middle that, because he had just said that deregulation will mean that more smaller businesses will be able to come and eat their lunch, I think.
Yes, yeah.
Those large companies. And what it seemed like, although I may have misheard, was that Eugene said, while deregulation will breed more competition, which will be chaotic, that the competition itself is negative because it breeds conflict and ultimately results in a stronger working class.
Okay, so on libertarian side's thoughts on like a free market, allowing small businesses to grow. I recently watched a documentary on the rise of Tencent, like the Chinese company, and how they, like one of the strategies that they use to maintain their own power is they effectively offer any business, like a lot of small businesses, an offer, or they give them offers of either we're going to buy you out, or we're going to create our own version of your product and compete because we have massive amounts of power. So just let us buy you out. And they're effectively, they hold such a strong stranglehold on like Chinese market because of that. Even with like there's been a bit of apparently there's been a bit of a split between them and China and the CCP recently. The CCP was surrendering, I think.
Very good point.
I was going to say, you were saying before that Austin, the libertarian, was saying, oh, somehow that people having more consumer goods was somehow a sign that it's working and that there's no poverty, that they can make it. It's like, that doesn't tell you really anything because they're made cheaper now because of a lot of them they're made offshore and all that, a lot of the stuff they have access to more consumer things. They're made cheaper because of that, that competition.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really tell you that they can, go up in society at all.
Yeah, okay.
So just some thoughts on the like ideas put forward by the anarchist guy, which I think is related within the readings.
Yeah.
I feel like his ideal society really requires everyone involved to be on board and share the same ideology.
Yeah.
If you have absolutely no regulation, what happens when people try to form, how do you stop people from forming monopolies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to also reflect on each one of them in terms of the limitation, especially the two more progressive ones, the socialist one and the anarchist one. As you highlighted, that was perhaps one of the limitations of anarchism, that it will leave everything to the communities and then self-reliance, and then how you're going to create, coordination and prevent them from turning into tribalism and conflict and those sort of things over the resources. One solution to this, which is one of the options you might think of for your final essay, is democratic federalism, which has been kind of experimented in the Kurdish area of Syria, known as Rojava or OJ. NVA. And these people, women have played a very significant role in that. It has, of course, its own problems as well. That they have tried to follow that kind of anarchism while at the same time trying to establish a system that is governed and ruled from the bottom up, so that wouldn't result in tribalism. And so, yeah, democratic confederalism is a type of anarchism, but it's I would say it's a post-anarchism. It also combines to adopt some socialism. But the state there is not an state that moves from the top into the bottom. It's a state that emerges out of self-reliant communities. That share values, same values, and principles to work together. And women have been very, very active in that. The stories of the female fighters and so forth, they've been constantly under bombardments by the Turkish and the Syrian forces, and they have been surviving. But they also had, their own problems as well. Of course, there's no problem. Free solution. As Roger says, it's the ultimate purpose to make and remake. Right? And yeah, socialism and stress on a state, and yeah, that also could be a weakness, but also we cannot ignore state in terms of the fact that a lot of affairs are too big to be run and organized at the community level. And considering the situation that we are divided in between countries and there is still this kind of political units and so on and so forth. Even Marx, although he was not anarchist, but he considered the state as something temporary that would finally disappear. But he considered some role for the socialist state to be played for some time, but that was not supposed to be forever. So that's one of the main issues that Marx could have with the Soviet Union.
But didn't Marx and Engels had a different definition of state? It's kind of like the colloquial one we use. They have like a specific definition of what state is.
The capitalist state, yes, but then they also had their own, but they were not very clear about what a socialist state should be. They mostly considered that as transition, not permanently. But they, yes, I mean, Marx unfortunately didn't leave long about the world. Yes, yeah, he wanted to write about and analyze the capitalist state and the role of the state in capitalism. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to point out one more thing that I was honest about was the libertarians have a position that by removing the state, removing the taxes, that encourages like altruism and charity.
Yeah.
Very,
I mean, they normally think that socialists are utopian, but that was utopianism 101. We just leave everything to the market, as Catherine said. It's reminds us of the 80s and Reagan. Anyway, okay. I had a number of slides. I'm not sure if I can cover them all, but yesterday at Orimba, I started with this slide. So if I fail to cover them, you may want to watch them, but they're kind of, again, auxiliary, and they're not very central. Our focus is on these two pieces of readings and the job, which is the commentary. And next week, there is no lectorial, no quiz, but I'll be available on Zoom at the same time. So the Zoom is not canceled. Just as a kind of an online kind of workshop. I understand that possibly many of you haven't had time to read the whole readings and start writing, but I believe by next week, many of you have started maybe writing your commentary. Remember, there is a secret, and that secret is that it's always starts with action, and then motivation comes. Don't wait until the motivation comes. It's always action, then motivation, then action. not motivation, action motivation. So if even if you, I mean, you still don't have the full confidence, you just start writing, just copy and paste the commentary question on the top of the your Word document. Okay, and then as you start reading the first reading, maybe a few interesting notes, but remember you have to squeeze everything to something between 600 to maximum 800. You're not going to penalize you if you go beyond 600. Now the policies are 10% above and below 600, but we can tolerate up to 800. Remember, that's one of the skills that we have to develop. Whether fortunately or unfortunately, that the skill of squeezing things, okay, writing things short and getting it right at the same time. So we want to be clear and concise. And yeah, this is one of the skills that I don't know how many of you would in situations where you kind of when you are asked to write a report, there is always a kind of a word limit, always. It's one of my nightmares when I write articles for the journals. They say, keep it below 700 or 800, and I normally go about 12,000.
So this one is just comparison weeks, the week 6 reading. It's not draw upon other readings before that. You're not focusing, you're just focusing on week 6
Yes, only is the yes. And if you would like to draw on anything external, you can reference it properly, but we can ornament just to say words, you don't need to have a list of references. We know you are writing about this too, so it may sound a little bit weird, but this is not an essay, okay? For your essay, yes, you will reference everything. So you just start by saying Rogers stands in 2014, and that's enough. And every time you want to get back to Rogers, you can mention the name. And no list of references. You take a look at the samples that I have shared with you. The few samples from last year, wherever I was on the assignment page. Also week 6 page or module, and see I have added more comments. You may not get that many, but because of the educational purposes, I have okay, where are we? Yeah, these are the. Yeah, it was not that easy actually to turn them to PDF and keep the comments. Unfortunately, Canvas doesn't work like 1018 on Canvas doesn't work like 1018 in Blackboard. So you see that these are numbered. So number 1, unfortunately, you can't see them on the margin. So you have to, after each page, you have to look at the comments that is given to that person. Names are removed, and you see here you see the rubric that's been used. Again, I copied and pasted here, and the general comment, and you can mark it. You just yourself mark it and see what grade you would give that person, and see if it matches. If you add up this, see if it matches. They're sitting in the middle. Maybe kind of, I better not to say, but they have, of course, strengths and they have weaknesses, but I had to try to maximize the comments just for educational purposes, so you would not, so you would try to avoid such issues. Little writing issues are the weight of them are of course not as strong as the content. The purpose is to make sure that you have understood the main arguments, you're capable of re-articulating them into your commentary and reflecting on them, structuring the writing. So one way, which sounds maybe a very straightforward way, is just a very short introduction about the purpose of your commentary. That, for instance, it's about, challenging the alternative, the myth of there is no alternative, through reviewing this and this. I have covered a number of not only alternatives but also in a critical manner. So this open not just listing a number of alternatives, but also they critically review them for us and reflect on them. But well, you say there are two types of limitations that you have to cover. One is the limitations of the alternatives. Well, that is practically automatically will be embedded in when you write about these two pieces, right? Rogers says this and this about this alternative. Well, of course, Rogers criticizes them. So that's a bit of a reflection. You can add your own reflection very briefly as well if you like. But then it's in the conclusion that you compare the two. So the first part is about what Rogers does, and then the second part what Wendy does, and this is what I'm suggesting. That some people go a little bit more creative and combine, and that's fine. But then it's in the conclusion that we would like to see, and that's very important to see that how you compare these two in terms of their approaches, the type of alternatives, their strengths in their arguments, and their weaknesses in their arguments, and their limitations are. If you go back and listen to what we just discussed when I was talking about them, you see that I intentionally mentioned some of these limitations. You may find other limitations from your point of view, which would be great, and you can include that there. So don't, I would say, don't overthink and overdo, and don't let yourself to be overwhelmed by the weight of it. And just try to, just as I said, try to be as pragmatic as you can, and reflect on it. This is, I mean, that's why you get 25 points for only 600 to 800 words, because there's a lot of reading and reflections and thinking. It's not just the quantity aspect of it, it's the quality aspect of it. And this would be a very good step forward, because that's why I say these two pieces of writing are very, readings and the commentary is very essential, in the sense that it's the very first step towards making ourselves familiar with the range of alternatives, and then you may develop a bit of interest in some of them. Well, eco-socialism is not very much covered here, for instance, or eco-anarchism. But it's the first step. And then in the just after submitting, I know you would possibly feel a little bit exhausted, but it could be also itself a bit of a something exciting to do. It's just if something attracts you, start thinking about what alternative you want to go for, and then you find two articles or whatever about that alternative, and make yourself a little bit familiar with the alternative that appeals to you, or you think it's not too difficult for you to study. Okay, so we have three of them, but for now, let's concentrate on the commentary. For now, yes, this will be something. So we have three samples, and the comments that, some of these comments are about of course, writing the styles and writing problems and so on and so forth, the structure problem, but also the content is important. As I said, we want to make sure that we understand the core arguments. Any questions? Yeah, next week we're going to have Zoom. So if you join me on Zoom, same time, yeah, maybe from the comfort of your home, but you might have started writing something, and you might have already read all of them. You have taken notes of your questions and things like that. You have faced a bit of a problem in writing, and then you would raise it, and that would be very beneficial for the rest of the class to hear that, because that could have been an issue for many other people, and then we will record it. hopefully, and it will be shared. So that would be, hopefully that would be a good conversation. The more you're prepared, the better for the conversation. Yes?
Sorry, was that format there where it was kind of in boxes and then numbered the points? Was that an acceptable format?
No, those boxes are created by Turnitin. When I I downloaded the
Oh, sorry, I meant in the, I think it was in the second sample, there was like blue.
sorry. Oh no, this blue boxes, when we want to, I mean, this means that number one comment is related to entire paragraph. I don't know, have you submitted things to Turnitin? I'm not sure. When I turned it to PDF, these squares appeared. Yeah.
That system that is used both at numbering the alternatives under each order, is that a format that?
Okay. No, that's one of the, if you look at this, one of the problems with this, that we don't want this, you know, that kind of, that's a little bit lazy way of, you know, just put that and then dot points. No, we don't want dot points. You see that we have commented on that. Yes.
Or is it just?
Yeah. Yes, as I said, yeah, you can follow that. But this is the purpose of this line, and that's the first part of the body about the first reading. It's just the second part of the body for the second reading. Yeah, we'll see that you're not the first group that is asked to do this in 600 to 800 words. It is possible. It is really possible. Yeah, you can just say things that are central and say it in kind of a very clear and brief way, concise way. Okay, when I guess when you start writing, you will see the if there is any difficulties. Take note of that and bring it to the Zoom class. And or if you can't make it, that's fine. Just email me and I'll be more than happy to, or we can have a kind of a private Zoom conversation. That's fine. It's part of the consultation hours that we are expected to offer you guys. So we'll find a time that works for both of us. Yes. People on Zoom, you guys are okay? You have any questions? Yeah. Okay. If you have any questions, yes, please just, okay. All good. Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Yeah, okay. If you have any questions, just either put it into the chat box or just please unmute yourself and let me know. Yes, I'm still. Yeah, these are some of these slides. Again, as I said, I have covered them yesterday. Yeah, a few slides at the beginning just summarizes things that we have learned in the previous week. So just to refresh our memories about the main takeaways. And then the colonial. I have practically said something about some of these slides already in the discussion of the writings. The readings. Yeah, the homogenizing, that, you know, I mean, this is the myth that the final myth, which is the I would say the father of all myths. And it became very famous when it was said by Thatcher in the 80s. that there is no alternative. She meant, there is no alternative to neoliberal capitalism. And practically, when someone tells you that there is no alternative, what kind of feeling that would give you? Kind of highly, kind of a deterministic.
That there's no horizon, there's nothing else behind dealing with this.
Yeah.
It's just, everything's just gonna keep going on and on, and so what you need like a point to, it's not just keep going on and on just for its own sake, just progress for itself.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it's psychologically, if someone tells me there is no alternative, there is no solution or something like that, I would just feel that they're telling me that you're nothing. I mean, humanity is, I mean, you can hardly tell humanity that there is no alternative. So Noam Chomsky says something very interesting about, the psychology behind this. And all over the place, from the popular culture to the propaganda system, there is no constant pressure to make people feel that they are helpless, that the only role they can have is to ratify decisions and to consume, as you just said, right? So the people are not going to buy into this, and they haven't. And an alternative, for instance, to World Economic Forum, people have started having their own World Social Forum, saying that it's not all about economy. The social is also important, with this slogan initially that another world is possible, and then change it to other worlds are possible. It's not just one another world. Again, emphasizing on the power of diversity. I have included something, a quote, a verse from Quran, because that book is very much demonized, and people think it's all about, killing the infidels and those sort of things. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. It became a very popular verse through the Iranian Revolution of 1979. It had a strong religious tone, but before, I mean, the kind of Islam that people had in their mind was very much different to what they saw at the world. Like the kind of socialism people had in mind, and then they saw it happening, being hijacked from them and turned it into a devil. So this verse is interesting in the sense that we normally think that religion is about reminding us of how God is powerful and everything is determined and decided by God and so on and so forth. But this one says something quite opposite, that challenges our views of what religion normally says, that God is not to change the destiny of a society in their favor until they strive towards changing their own selves. The real change comes from you guys. And I only would start paving your way when you move. I'm not the prime mover, you're the prime mover. And that is compatible with the free will that humans have, right? So it's and then you will say, well, if that's the God that has given up her will or his will or its will, whatever, to the people's will, then what the heck that God may do? What's the point of believing in that God? Well, it's to remind us that perhaps there are structures. There is a truth that if you move towards that, you can get. Your effort is not wasted. Sometimes when I was so depressed and was feeling very disempowered in my life, especially in relation to atrocities that I could witness in my life. My dad was, he was saying something very interesting that sits with me. It says with me for until today. He said that the universe inside is as large, as important as the universe outside. So if you can satisfy yourself, even if you can't change it, but if you can satisfy yourself by finding yourself on the right side of the history, tell yourself that I've done what I could do truly and without any self-deception. That satisfaction is a great achievement. It is as great as achieving any change outside. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit too spiritual, but yes, I think many people are religious or spiritual, especially many young people. We've got a phenomenon called believing without belonging, and I think there are many who would like to draw on their own faith and to be positive and to be effective. And I think almost every faith has the capacities to be rethought and redefined by the people. The problem is those just hierarchies that may prevent, especially they share interest with the powerful. So another interesting thing is from Gandhi, although he didn't say that practically, I believe, but it's attributed to him, that be the change you want to see in the world. Again, this may remind you of what Roger was saying. These alternatives are about to make and remake. Don't wait. Don't look at it as the end product. Don't look at your solutions. You want to establish a truly democratic society. You want to establish a truly just society. Start being just and inclusive and accommodative and participatory from the beginning through your movements. Don't marginalize others in your movement, because and then think that maybe in the end justice will shine. Okay, how much time we have? Yeah, have a look at this. I mean, in response, for the first time, I have included a few slides here, if you find time, about, this is about how to debunk. There is no alternative. One is to point out the flaws and problems with the system. We have done this in the first few weeks so far. Then offering alternatives, the alternative visions, making ourselves familiar with the alternatives. This is for the second half of the semester. And the third option that we have, the third thing that we can do to debunk Tina, is to also understand and study the movements that have pushed for change. Unfortunately, we can't cover that in this course. I wish we had a course about social movements. But there are some slides here about a summary of some of things that I have done. When you look at the movements, you see individuals' actions, rising awareness, and reforms, and so on and so forth. Have a look at this. It's just because we had a kind of a sad conversation. I thought I should include something here about things that people really can do, and they have done. These are not just me imagining. I have tried to draw on what I knew about the movements, that people start from small and then they can use low-cost tactics, advocate for change, crowdfunding, and so on and so forth. You may say, well, I don't have time for it. I'm a student, and the people around me, I haven't seen them very much involved in such things. I would tell you that in not very long time, I mean, very soon, we will see that many of us will be pushed into this, fortunately or unfortunately, because we can't just watch things devolve in front of our eyes. So yes, the non-ideological ideologies, these are the things, in terms of the cognitive, in terms of the views and visions. These are the list of things that we can do. Below them, there is a more a lengthier description of the points that are made here. If you have time and interest, you can have a look. I have mostly covered the rest of them. There's not much to cover. You are familiar with the bad pizza and the good pizza. Yeah, I think we discussed this about, the reform versus radical change. Yes, and the rest of it. Yeah. Any questions, any comments? Any ideas? And then all the best with the commentary on what's the rest of the rest of the courses we do. Thank you.
I don't remember all everyone else, but I had a idea about the, sorry.
You had fun. Sorry, Paula.